Does anyone even know what the word prodigal means anyway? It seems like one of those non-words in our Christian vocabulary, a word we say often in church but do not necessarily understand, like the word hallowed. Prodigal fits in with other words like grace, which we also say often, or forgiveness, or benediction. What even is a benediction? I often assumed that this word had a negative connotation because it's the descriptor of the reckless son. And depending on how the word is used, it can be used to describe very unlikable traits like wastefulness, imprudence. But to my surprise, prodigal does not have to mean all of those unlikable things. It can also mean extravagant or lavish or generous. And the real secret of this parable is that everyone's a little bit prodigal. And the grace of God is the most prodigal of all. God's grace is extravagant and lavish and generous. And it is reckless and wasteful and imprudent. What else would grace be if it wasn't all of those things at the same time? There's this lovely poem by Maya Angelou I want to share with you all as part of this sermon today called Touched by an Angel, and it has nothing to do with the TV show, I promise. We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in shells of loneliness, until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. Until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. The younger son runs away from home with everything, thinking that he has solved all of his problems, that he can live the way that he wants to live without any responsibility or care. His older brother is taking care of everything else for him, so he doesn't need to worry about sticking around, being dutiful, learning the family trade. He doesn't understand the deep well of grace his father gave to him when he offered him everything at the worst moment, at the most scandalous moment to ask. Because he asks for half of his inheritance while his father is still living, essentially implying that the only good thing his father has ever given to him will be wealth and possessions. And rather than fight his son about it, the father does exactly what his younger son asks of him. He gives him everything without a second thought. And it is when he is on his journey into this other kind of life, thinking that all of his problems will go away if he just has all of the things that he's been wanting, traveling to all the places he's wanted to see, spending all the money he wants to spend, that will somehow manage to get rid of that ache inside of him, that longing for love. And of course, most of us, we are not surprised that that does not work. Those things never work for us either. We can go and chase all those things thinking if we just have the right job or live in the right neighborhood or purchase the right car or have the right friends, that we will somehow manage to get rid of that ache inside of us. That we will somehow manage to no longer have that nagging question, is this all that there really is? And thankfully, we don't all need to end up feeding the pigs to realize that we can't find the answer to that question just by having the things or the accomplishments or the people in our lives that we think will get rid of that longing. Maya Angelou says, "Love arrives, and in its train come ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls." If we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls. It may seem foolish to say, but I think the son was bold in going home. He risked a lot of shame in going back. He could have easily stayed in this foreign land during a famine, feeding the pigs for the rest of his life. But that memory of love is what drew him back home. It's that memory of love that compels him to say to himself, I am willing to be a servant in my Father's house, if that just means that I can go home and be home with my family. His deep risk is that he has squandered everything. And like the kids pointed out so wisely earlier, that what would it take for his family to trust him again? Why would they believe that he was really coming back for the right reasons? Why would they believe that he really, really wanted to try this time? It's a very risky thing that he does. And yet I find it so relatable that he enters into this place of bravery when he's at this moment of decision, when his life could go two very different directions. And I wonder if any of us have ever felt that way. Not that you have ever been feeding pigs in a foreign country during a famine, of course, but if you have ever imagined what it would be like to repair a relationship, what it would be like to admit that you were wrong and not know what would happen when you did, what it would be like to walk into the room and say what needed to be said, not knowing what kind of reply you would receive. That is the spirit of the younger son in you, compelling you, even when all logic and reason and the facts of your life may tell you, I don't even deserve to talk to this person again because of the pain that I have brought into our life. And yet that younger son is no longer afraid. He's truly done the worst that he could do. The way Jesus tells the story is quite exaggerated, because what he has done is the most offensive thing that a child can do in the story that Jesus tells in that era. By asking for his inheritance so early, by behaving as if he doesn't even care that his father's still alive. And yet his deep boldness is in the love that he has, that memory of that relationship, and wanting to restore it. Maya Angelou tells us some more wisdom today too. We are weaned from our timidity in the flush of love's light. We dare be brave, and suddenly we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free. Love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free. The Father knew this truth very well. He was very foolish, according to most modern standards, giving away half of his wealth, probably knowing full well what would happen to it when he did. And yet that deep, unending love for his son could not be chained up or locked up. There was no way he could help himself when he saw his son coming down the road. He couldn't help it. He had to go. He had to run towards him, looking very undignified, so he could embrace his child, a child that he may have thought had died, maybe thought that he would never see again. And all of those other things didn't matter so much anymore. The betrayal and the pain, all of that didn't matter anymore. Because what mattered was that his son had come home. The child that he loved, that he was waiting up for, had finally returned. It may seem a bit foolish to us too, hearing the way the father responded to his son. And even some of the kids pointed that out to us as well, that it would be very smart of the dad to welcome him back. But I really wonder if there is some wisdom in the father for us too. That there's something so profoundly moving about being full of that kind of love and receiving it, but also giving that kind of love. And although the son was bold, I think the father required some boldness too, in the way that he loves. He had to be brave enough to welcome his son back, brave in the way that he could be hurt again, brave in the way that he could risk losing more, not just physical possessions, but more pain, like risk losing more love. But it doesn't seem to matter at all. He jumps and leaps into action the moment his son is in sight, completely eager to be reunited with him. And I wonder what we can learn from that kind of excitement and love too. There's a reckless abandon in the Father's love. It is that kind of love that is prodigal. It's that kind of love that is extravagant and that moves us. It's that kind of love that causes us to take risks, to do things we never thought we would do, to make decisions we never thought we would make for the sake of the love that we feel. And it's that kind of love that the older son struggles to understand. I'm an oldest sibling. Some of you may know this about me. So I very frequently relate to the older son the most in this story. And I was the good one who always did my homework and got good grades in school and helped my mom with the dinner chores. And my younger siblings had more freedom to explore and rebel a little bit, which they won't mind me saying that up here. And I always felt a little resentful that they got to have a little more fun than I did. So I'm really curious about what prodigal love looks like for him, and wondering if any of you relate to him too. Because I often wonder if the prodigal son and the attention he receives, the younger son, especially at this moment, like it seems to make the older son feel as if he did not matter as much to his father, as if his faithfulness and responsibility did not matter as much to his father. And there is something to be said about the faithfulness of the consistency of love that the older son shows his father, but that is not the point of the story. I do think, though, that there are times in our lives where resentment and cynicism can block our ability to feel that kind of radical love, that kind of prodigal grace. And so I see in the older son a reminder for us, a reminder not to lose sight of that kind of vulnerability, to not lose sight of the kind of risk-taking love that God shows us every day and then invites us to show other people. And to not make it all about us. The older son's comments are all about himself in the story, all about how this was not fair, Dad. How could you do this to me? Why didn't you let me have a party too with my friends? He leaps into a space of self-focus and reveals the bitterness in his heart that had been growing. And that is something that can poison that kind of love, the kind of love that Maya Angelou says can set us free. It is that kind of love that set the father free to love both his children with abandon. It's that kind of love that led the younger son to come home. And it's that kind of love that softens the older son's heart so he can go in and embrace his brother. My hope for us today is that we can find that kind of radical love inside of us. That the radical love that we see in this story doesn't just remain on these pages or in our Bibles, but lives in us, lives in our relationships and in our hearts, lives in the world around us. But it can't do that if we play it safe all the time. We have to be a little bit reckless like the Father for that kind of love to live in us and in the world. We have to be a little bit vulnerable like the younger son and admit when we're wrong and seek to heal relationships. And we have to let go of whatever bitterness is holding us back, because that is the way of that prodigal grace. It is the way of that love that Maya Angelou says will set us free. Amen.